Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. I was working in an organization that was super toxic, so much so that we were a revolving door. Most employees stayed only for a few months. To counter this, our management put a 4-month notice into everyone's contract, including the existing employees. It's not strictly illegal where this happened, but very unusual. I believe the idea behind that was to make it harder for employees to find jobs elsewhere, as potential employers didn't usually want to wait for 4 months. However, this didn't work, as most people simply quit and waited for a month or two before starting their job hunt. I was there for almost 5 years. I needed the money, so I put up with whatever abusive treatment was thrown at me. My boss was a guy we'll call Marcus. Now, Marcus was not particularly good, but he sometimes respected the fact that I was the most tenured grunt in this organization. Do note that after about 2 years, I was doing a lot of additional work on top of my official responsibilities, primarily because I was the only one who knew how to do those tasks. Everyone else had already left. This would become important later. Enter Elena. Elena was poached from a somewhat infamous tech company and was literally flown in from a different continent. She was brought in to strategically improve our division. This was quite strange given that our division generated most profits. "We need to shake things up around here," Elena announced in her first company-wide meeting. "Some of you might find my methods challenging." Within months, Elena made the environment even more toxic. She pulled Marcus's team under her and got Marcus fired, and she actively encouraged us grunts to spy on each other. "Remember, team collaboration means keeping me informed about everything your colleagues are doing," she would say with an unsettling smile during our one-on-ones. Elena also had it out for me from day one. Until today, I don't know why. She started making my life much harder than the others. This culminated in her taking me aside and telling me that I was not pulling my weight. "Listen," she said, leaning uncomfortably close. "I've been watching you. You might have fooled Marcus with your so-called expertise, but I'm not impressed. You need to step it up or we'll have to reconsider your position here." Now, at this point, I was doing quite well in the organization, plus I had been doing a lot of additional work critical to our business since only I knew certain systems and processes, see high attrition above. So I was quite angry. I started looking out. I wasn't still brave enough to quit and start looking. Fortunately, I was able to find a job that was willing to wait the 4 months. So it was my turn to take Elena aside and tell her I quit. Boy, was Elena pissed. She went from denial to negotiation before acceptance. "You can't quit," she sputtered, her face turning red. "That's not possible." When I assured her it was very possible, she quickly changed tactics. "What if I give you a raise at the year-end review? Maybe even a promotion," she offered, trying to sound casual. "I appreciate the offer, but my mind is made up," I replied firmly. Thus I was serving my notice and working away like an honest bee, my usual work plus the additional work. At this point, I was called in by HR and told that Elena wanted me gone. The insane part was that they wanted me to pay the company for the 3.5-month shortfall in notice. "Elena feels your continued presence is disruptive," said Kathy from HR, not meeting my eyes. "We'd like to terminate your notice period early, and according to Section 12.4 of your contract, you would need to compensate the company for the remaining notice period." I obviously refused, then went back and checked the contract. Turns out that a notice of less than 4 months could only happen through mutual consent, and the initiating party, company if they wanted me gone sooner, or me if I wanted to leave earlier, had to compensate the other party for the shortfall. The next day, I stopped doing almost all of my work. I logged in and logged out my hours and did jack crap. I stopped doing any additional work I had been doing and started taking it really slow on my primary job responsibilities. Since no one else understood the details of what I did, I knew it would be very hard for Elena or HR to prove that I was doing any of this on purpose. Then I sat back with my popcorn. Soon, there was a complete meltdown all around. Elena would pull me into meetings and scream and try to bully me, and I would say nothing but smirk to her face. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she yelled during one particularly heated meeting. "The quarterly report is a disaster. The system integration is failing. Fix it now." I just looked at her calmly. I'm doing exactly what's in my job description. Nothing more, nothing less. Next, they tried to have someone else learn the additional work I used to do for me so that they could do what I did. Remember I said earlier how I was the only one who knew some of the old systems and processes? Well, now I claimed I didn't really remember any of them, so obviously there could be no handover. "Could you walk Trevor through the legacy database system?" Kathy asked nervously. That's interesting," I replied, tapping my chin. I'm not sure I remember all the details anymore. It's been years since I set that up, and it was never officially part of my job. Elena could do nothing, as none of this had been my responsibility or part of my contract, since the leadership had been only too happy to see me do this for free. Soon, my workplace turned into a dumpster fire. The HR Elena smartened up and offered to buy out my notice if I cooperated and helped transition my work. "Listen," Kathy said, trying to sound reasonable. "We're willing to pay you for the full notice period if you'll just help us with the transition. You can leave today and still get paid. Isn't that what you want?" I refused. "I'm afraid I'll need to complete my contractual notice period," I said with a smile. "As you pointed out, the contract is very clear about this." Then, to twist the knife further, I started having meetings with fellow grunts, remember everyone was always a newbie, and encouraging them to leave as well, indirectly nothing that could implicate me. "So, Trevor," I would say casually during lunch, "have you ever wondered what similar roles at other companies are paying these days? I was shocked when I looked into it. HR tried to get me to leave twice more, but I ended up serving the full 4 months. Remember the mutual consent part? By the time I left, 3 more people had quit, and Elena was being investigated by the parent company for the sudden drop in productivity. As I walked out on my last day, Elena glared at me from her office. "I hope you're satisfied," she hissed. "Completely," I replied with a genuine smile. "Have a great day." The next one is an entitled people story. So this happened about 2 years ago, and I'm still laughing about it. I own a small law firm that specializes in property law and real estate disputes. Yeah, the irony will become crystal clear in a minute. My wife and I bought this beautiful piece of property on the edge of town, 3 acres with a modest house, perfect for our retirement plans. The land came with fruit trees, a small creek, and most importantly, complete privacy. At least that's what we thought. Our neighbor, let's call her Karen because she absolutely earned that title, lived in the house next to ours. When we first moved in, she seemed normal enough. She brought over cookies, welcomed us to the neighborhood, the whole 9 yards, but that honeymoon period lasted about 3 weeks. The problem started when we decided to build a fence along our property line. We'd had the land surveyed, knew exactly where our boundaries were, and wanted some privacy for our backyard. Nothing fancy, just a standard 6-foot wooden privacy fence. That's when Karen showed her true colors. She marched over one morning while the contractors were setting posts and started screaming about how we were encroaching on her property. I politely showed her the survey, explained that we were well within our boundaries, even gave her a few feet of buffer space to be neighborly. But Karen wasn't having any of it. She claimed that her family had lived there for decades, and that the real property line was 3 feet into our yard. According to her, we were stealing her land and she wasn't going to stand for it. I tried explaining that property boundaries are legal documents, not family traditions, but she stormed off muttering about lawyers and lawsuits. I figured that was the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. Over the next few months, Karen escalated things in the most ridiculous ways possible. She called the police, claiming we were trespassing on her property when we worked in our own garden. She reported us to the city for illegal construction, even though we had all the proper permits. She even started taking pictures of us through our windows and sending them to the homeowners association with complaints about our suspicious activities. The final straw came when she hired her own surveyor. Not to settle the dispute, mind you, but to prove that we had stolen her land. When that surveyor confirmed what ours had said, that we were completely within our boundaries, Karen accused him of being part of some conspiracy. That's when she decided to sue us. Now, here's where my professional background becomes relevant. I've been practicing property law for over 20 years. I've seen every possible boundary dispute, easement argument, and property rights claim you can imagine. I know these laws inside and out. When Karen's lawsuit landed on my desk, I couldn't believe what I was reading. She was claiming adverse possession, alleging that her family had used our land for decades and therefore had legal rights to it. She wanted 3 feet of our property, plus damages for emotional distress and loss of enjoyment of her property. The thing is, adverse possession is a real legal concept, but it requires very specific conditions. You need to openly, notoriously, exclusively, and continuously use someone else's land for a statutory period, usually years or decades, and you need to do it without the owner's permission. Karen's claim was complete nonsense. The previous owners of our house had lived there for 15 years and had maintained the entire property. There was absolutely no evidence that Karen or her family had ever used our land, but she was demanding we give her a strip of our property 3 feet wide and running the entire length of our boundary line. Her lawyer, who I knew by reputation and wasn't impressed with, sent increasingly threatening letters. They demanded we cease all use of Karen's land immediately, remove our fence, and pay for a new survey to properly establish the boundaries. That's when I decided to give them exactly what they were asking for. You see, Karen's lawyer had made a critical error in his demands. He insisted that we cease all use of the disputed property until the matter is resolved in court. He specifically demanded that we not walk on it, not maintain it, not landscape it, and not access it in any way. So I complied, maliciously. I sent a formal response agreeing to their demands. I would immediately cease all use of the disputed 3-foot strip of land along our property line. I would not walk on it, maintain it, landscape it, or access it in any way until the court made a final determination. But here's the beautiful part. That 3-foot strip included Karen's access to her own driveway. You see, Karen's house sat on a narrow lot, and her driveway curved slightly onto what she claimed was her property but was actually ours. When the original developer had laid out the neighborhood decades ago, they'd designed Karen's driveway to use a small easement across the corner of what became our property. The previous owners had always allowed this, and we'd planned to continue the arrangement. It was no big deal, just a few square feet of concrete that let Karen access her garage. But now that Karen's lawyer had demanded I cease all use of the disputed property, I was legally obligated to comply with their demands. That meant I had to block access to any part of our property, including the corner where Karen's driveway crossed our land. I installed a fence post with bright orange construction fencing right across Karen's driveway access. The screaming started within hours. Karen came pounding on our door, red-faced and furious, demanding to know why she couldn't access her own garage. I very politely explained that her lawyer had demanded I cease all use of the disputed property, and that included allowing anyone else to use it. I was simply complying with their legal demands. She threatened to call the police, so I handed her a copy of her lawyer's letter with the relevant sections highlighted. I explained that I was bound by the court filing to avoid any activity that could be seen as asserting ownership over the disputed land, and that included granting access to other parties. Karen's lawyer called me within 2 days. He was furious, claiming I was acting in bad faith and escalating the dispute. I very calmly explained that I was following his instructions to the letter. He had demanded that I cease all use of the disputed property, and I had complied completely. He tried to argue that blocking Karen's driveway was different from the land use issues, but I had done my homework. According to the lawsuit Karen had filed, she was claiming ownership of that entire strip of land, including the part where her driveway crossed. If she owned it, she didn't need my permission to use it. If she didn't own it, then she was trespassing, and I was entitled to block access. They couldn't have it both ways. The situation got even better when winter arrived. That 3-foot strip of land that I was now forbidden to maintain included several large tree branches that had been hanging over Karen's roof. I'd always trimmed them back to prevent damage, but now that was off limits. When a heavy snow brought down one of those branches and punched a hole in Karen's garage roof, she tried to sue me for property damage. I simply pointed to her lawyer's letter demanding that I not maintain the disputed property in any way. Meanwhile, Karen was having to park her car on the street because she couldn't access her garage. The homeowners association started fining her for violating parking rules. Her insurance company refused to cover the roof damage because she'd created the situation by filing a frivolous lawsuit. The final blow came when Karen realized she couldn't sell her house. Any potential buyer's attorney would discover the ongoing property dispute and the blocked driveway access. Her property had become effectively worthless while the lawsuit was pending. After 6 months of this chaos, Karen's lawyer quietly reached out about settling. They were willing to drop all claims to our property in exchange for us removing the barriers and returning to the previous arrangement. I had a better idea. I offered to sell Karen a proper easement for her driveway access, for the exact amount she'd demanded in damages in her original lawsuit, plus my legal fees, plus the cost of the new survey she'd insisted on. She paid without argument. The best part? I used that money to install a beautiful stone retaining wall along our property line, built precisely on the surveyed boundary. It's about 2 feet high, perfect for sitting and enjoying our garden. And every time I see Karen struggling to squeeze her car through the narrow easement she had to buy back from us, I remember why I love property law so much. The moral of the story? When you're dealing with a lawyer who specializes in exactly the type of dispute you're trying to create, maybe think twice before making demands about how they should manage their own property. Karen learned that lesson the expensive way. The next one is a petty revenge story. This is an old story I had not thought of for ages. Not sure why it popped into my head today, but I want to document it before it slips away again. First, we have to go back to the way before times, when Radio Shack was the king of cell phone sales and still actually sold component-level electronics. I was your typical sales agent, 18, perpetually stoned, and quite helpful for the average customer. My job becomes relevant later. Enter Dave. Dave was a regular party crasher in my friends group. I say in with sarcasm. He was that person everyone has known forever and just kind of tolerated but tried to avoid. Kind of guy that was constantly showing up already plastered and picking a fight with someone smaller. Thankfully, once we were all past school age, everyone cut him out of their lives a cancer. What happens below was just before graduation. We were having a little get-together, just 9 or 10 friends getting drunk together, not a crazy party or anything. Dave shows up and lets himself in as usual. Within 20 minutes, he's picking a fight. Tries to sucker punch someone and ends up face planting in the kitchen. As he's going down, his new cell phone comes flying out of his pocket. He was way too drunk to even notice, so we proceeded to pass the phone around, messing with settings. This was one of those phones that was technically an early smartphone, but still looked closer to a flip phone, mechanical keyboard and all. I changed his ringer to the iconic, "You shall not pass," quote, and handed the phone off to the next person. I didn't think about it again until 2 weeks later when Dave storms into Radio Shack screaming about how someone at Bell ducked up and owes him an apology. Keep in mind, this was the very early days of smartphones and the cost of data was still extremely high. I guess the next person saw what I had changed his ringer to and decided to one-up me big time. They had found a way to download the high-definition LOTR trilogy. Not only had it completely filled the phone's memory, but a few weeks later, Dave got a bill for $3,500 of data usage. The truth is, I could have called Bell and gotten the charges removed from the account. It would not have been the first time I had helped someone with an accidental download. Knowing what a perpetual ass Dave had been to pretty much everyone in his life over the last 18 years, I declined to assist him and just gave him Bell's customer service number. I hope he had to pay every penny. Duck Dave. The next one is a malicious compliance story. As a hobby, I have taken to trading card games, Pokemon, and Magic the Gathering to be specific. I am not collecting sealed products, but rather I am usually buying bulk so that I can make multiple decks and play with my family. This is important because I am often making huge bulk orders that consist of 50 cards or more. There are a few shops near me, and I am fortunate enough to be close to about 5 hobby shops that sell Pokemon and Magic singles. I managed to drag my family into the Pokemon TCG hobby roughly a year ago. Since then, the process of making an order was to select from their online stock and check out with the cart. At this time, you are given 2 options: pay in advance for your order or pay in the store. Paying in advance, while very sensible, has often led to cards being paid for that they did not have in stock, as in, it was mistakenly labeled as in stock, but actually was not. This would then result in a refund system that would take 2-3 days to complete. The issue is that it was super inconvenient when I had to wait for 2-3 days to recoup the money. I personally experienced a transaction of a $10 card that needed to be refunded. So I spoke to one of the staff and they told me, "When you have big orders, it's perfectly fine to call ahead of time and we can pick the order when we have time. In fact, as long as you don't abuse this process, it works out for everyone." That staff member is awesome, and so for a year, that's exactly what I did. This process accomplishes 3 things. 1, I am not paying for a product that couldn't be fulfilled. 2, I would reduce my time waiting because I called ahead of time by 4 to 5 hours. 3, the staff members would have plenty of time to grab the order. I never abused this process and always came through when I said I would come through. Now, this wouldn't be malicious compliance if not for the next part. About 2 months ago, me and my family took the dive into Magic the Gathering because Commander is a blast. This has caused me to start hoarding cards again and making decks for myself and for my family's usage. So, I was back into the swing of things again, making 50+ single card orders from this shop that I loved very much. During my usual 4-hour in-advance phone call, I was told, "Hey, you have to stop calling in these orders. It's store policy to only pull orders that have been paid for. We won't be pulling your cards until they are paid for." Weird. I was told otherwise, but I will ask them when I get there. So I get there to pick up and pay for my order and tried to explain that this process was something that a previous staff member told me was A-okay and even encouraged. There were 2 staff members and they both responded again with a very terse and repeated message of, "It's store policy." The message was fine enough, but the tone and rudeness had me floored. They told me from now on, prepay for all of my orders and then come to pick them up. So here is where the malicious compliance begins. It was clear what they wanted me to do: prepay and show up. So a few weeks later, what I did was scroll through their inventory and started the blingification of my decks. I proceeded to spend roughly 40 minutes scrolling through their online inventory and adding to my cart with various amounts of most hollow foil basic land card I could find for under $1. For those of you who aren't familiar, these basic lands are pretty cheap, $0.10 to $0.60 each. They also are categorized by sets and as individual printings, so each basic land has its own set and its own foil print version. This means that they would need to hunt each land by set and by foil print. I had carded roughly 100 cards. 100 cards that they would need to hunt through at least 40 different sets. They would also need to specifically find the foil only of the basic lands. Even more, I gave them an hour of time to pick the order. An hour, while definitely not a lot of time, is more than enough to grab this order. When I get there, it was one of the two guys that had reinforced the new method of ordering. Even better, he was swamped. He hadn't even started my order. I would have loved to give him the 4 to 5 hours that I normally would give, but it was store policy that I stop calling in advance and just order, pay, and show up. So I wait. I asked if they started my order. He quickly responded with, "Yes, I am getting to it." I think that even he knew that this would have been much easier if I had called 4 hours in advance like I normally would. This may be strange to say, but I was very happy that there were 4 cards that were not available for the order. So I had paid for 4 cards that I would never see fulfilled. Do you remember the staff member that was awesome? Yeah, he showed up about 30 minutes into my wait, and he asked if I had been waiting for a long time. I had said that it was about 30 minutes. For my wait, he had given me one of the tournament participant packs, and I had actually pulled a $30 card, Roaming Throne. The exchange was made. I waited 40 minutes. 4 cards were missing. I plan on approaching their social media, or shop owner, and ask for clarification from the establishment on what I should be doing in the future. That will be something I do in the near future, but for now, I feel vindicated. The staff member had to frantically hunt for the cards, and even had to tell me that there were cards missing. All things that the previous system avoided. The next one is an entitled people story. This is about my aunt. She has always been a bit snobby, and that has sort of shaped how I and my side of the family interact with her and her side. Aunt has 3 kids and been married 3 times. All of the men had been past friends of my dad's, I think most from college. The 2 oldest kids are my older cousins, both girls, are from first husband. The 3rd kid, my little cousin, male, is from 3rd husband. Aunt and uncle have always done things for the benefit of just their family, and I mean just the nuclear family. While my 2 older cousins would split their time between their parents, aunt and uncle really focused on themselves and their son. I can give examples in the comments, but to keep this shorter, I had to cut some stuff. Aunt and uncle treated my older cousins a lot differently than my younger cousin, and it seemed to affect them to the point that my older 2 cousins don't really have anything to do with aunt and uncle anymore, unless they absolutely need to. In the last few years, multiple things have changed for the family as a whole. My dad passed when he was relatively young. My mom, who had breast cancer when we were all younger, had her cancer come back during COVID and came back affecting her bones now. Grandpa also passed in the last year. All of this has given me the perception that life is something to be cherished and is not a for sure thing. I am saying this because things have been happening and some things were mentioned about wills. After Grandpa passed, we have had talks about different things and how people want things when they go, bringing me aunt and uncle back into the fold now. Apparently at some point after Grandpa passed, Aunt talked to Grandma and brought up how she, Aunt, was the only one left, so she would get everything after Grandma died. First off, I don't want to think about losing Grandma yet. I want her for however much longer we have her. But I do understand these talks sometimes need to happen, but I don't think I would ever say anything like this if I was in my aunt's role. Grandma told my mom that Aunt had said this, and apparently Grandma's response back to Aunt was, "Your brother had a family too. We won't just disinherit them just because he has passed." Now add this on top of other claims that Aunt and Uncle have said the farm should be theirs, and how they'll turn the nice horse barn that Grandpa had built for Grandma into a cattle barn and essentially kick my mother and sister out from usage of it, as well as younger cousin who honestly doesn't fall very far from either of his parents' trees that Grandpa promised him a certain amount of land. Now, mind you, this amount of land is a large portion of what my grandparents own in its entirety. If Grandpa had promised younger cousin this amount of land, Grandpa would have tried to keep stuff equal for the rest of us, and there's 5 of us grandchildren in total. What younger cousin is claiming would not have been feasibly possible to divide up the land that they own and give all of us equal amounts if the amount little cousin is saying is the amount stated. I am really just ranting about my family. I know that there is nothing that I can do in this situation because there is no need for it. Grandma and Grandpa, before he passed, took care of it. Just needed to get this off my chest about what is happening. The next one is an entitled parent story. I mentioned in a prior post that my narcissist father in the 90s was angry that I was living out of a camper trailer, but not because I was using it for a home, but because I had a camper trailer. He'd wanted one for years and just never got around to it. On top of his other faults, you can add extreme procrastinator to the list. After I moved into my uncle's backyard with the trailer, my parents eventually found me. They forced their way in and stole my car keys and then my car. That situation had to be resolved with police. They eventually started demanding I be their free driver again for when they went out drinking, and that didn't go over well either. Eventually, my mother showed up to gripe at me about something else. By then, she was pretending to be over wanting my car, but it was pretty obvious she was not over it. On this particular day, she was mad at me because my father was ranting about my trailer. Apparently, he was pissed that I could just take it anywhere I wanted. And my mother told me she wanted me to get an apartment or something so my father would shut up about it. I told her no, I was getting way too good of a deal living out of the trailer. My uncle was hardly charging me anything, and I just had to do his yard work on top of the low amount of rent utilities I was paying. There's no way I'd give that up for an apartment. When my parents got their hands on another Vista Cruiser, it could tow things like my Caprice could. The Cavalier my father stole from me couldn't tow anything, and the small orange 70s car my mother had used for a while wasn't made for towing either. So when they got another wagon, they got one with a tow hitch. And as soon as they had it, my father wanted to start towing things, and then he decided all of a sudden he wanted to take my trailer camping, and he treated it like an FYI at first. My father, in his usual attitude, just showed up and bluntly told me he was going to use my trailer to go camping. I refused. And then he tried to order me as his son to let him take my trailer camping during the summer. I told him no again. It was literally my home. And I know him. He'd try to park my trailer at his house, and then never give it back. My father tried to give me his Gorilla Man act, and I met it head on. Basically, two rednecks chest bumping. But I told him to his face that he was not getting my trailer, ever, and to go out and buy his own. The trailer also had a title in my name, and I wouldn't hesitate to call police if he took it. My old man, as usual, called me ungrateful, tried gaslighting, and finally left. My uncle watched practically the whole thing from a window with popcorn. He loved any time he saw my father miserable because my father was the golden child between them, and my uncle was treated horribly when he was growing up. So he was more entertained than anything else when he saw my old man having a tantrum over not getting his way. My father went out and rented a camper trailer for a few days, and then suddenly he didn't like camping anymore. He only wanted to do it because I had a trailer, and it was pretty obvious he wanted to claim it for himself. He honestly believed that anything that was mine was also his. And it took him several years to get it through his thick head that wasn't how things worked, and just about anything he ever borrowed from me after I moved out, I never got those things back. So, I didn't trust him with anything. I personally didn't feel the need to do any camping because I was already living out of a trailer, but I gave it a try when I became a parent myself, and it honestly wasn't that fun for us. My ex-wife especially hated it, but I wouldn't say she was what ruined the experience. I did take that trailer to a couple of family reunions, though. That saved on motels. I was far from the only one in the family to do that, though, and my parents demanded I let them sleep in my spare bunk for free during our mid-90s family reunion. I said hell no, and my parents were humiliated right out of that reunion anyway because they doubled down over how I didn't hand over my second car to them, and my mother got slapped by a cousin for being a horrible parent. Anyway,